Big Ten Plus 4 is a member of Odd Pods Media and ASAP All Sports All Plays Network.
Welcome into Big Ten Plus 4, college sports with a Midwest perspective, blue collar and blue blood. I'm Dalton Shetler. We have Sam Sprunger, Tony Hollinsworth. We got the whole gang together because football is really here. I know last week we kind of said it, we made it feel like it, and Nebraska Northwestern kind of gave us that feeling, but boy, last night, welcome kinda. Let's see that graphic down there. Welcome kinda. But last night,
wrong button. Sorry.
Yeah, you had. Now
saying, man, we're already skipping to basically the end part of my take for the show. So I'm getting a hit here from Sam.
But we had Penn State, Purdue last night. We had the backyard brawl. We had so many good games, and there's so many more coming up on tap. Let's start off with the obvious. Sam Sprunger being our Purdue rep and as the Purdue fan. Last night, Purdue has the lead late. They give up a touchdown with about a minute left and end up dropping to Penn State. Yeah, end up dropping to Penn State. And honestly, it's a situation where if Purdue wins that game, their other two games against East Division teams are against Indiana and Rutgers, I believe is the other one.
Maryland, I thought.
Maryland, you might be right. Point was that it wasn't Ohio State, Michigan, or Michigan State. You dodged a lot of the top teams, and you had a route really to maybe make your way to a claim for the Big Ten West and maybe take the inside track in this race. But instead, they drop late in West Lafayette. Sam, your thoughts?
Are you writing them off now, Dalton? Is that what we're doing? Are you saying Purdue is out of it right at this time after 1 week? Is that what
I'm
you're saying?
saying? It could have been a clear inside track in this race, and now they're going to have to earn some of those against Wisconsin, Minnesota, which they're going to have to do anyway. But there aren't any big games that are counted for losses where many of those other teams have those on their schedules.
So I have some analysis. Is that what we're doing or just gut reaction? Because I had a big old production. I was going to sing the Purdue fight song. I had it all planned. I had streamers, maybe confetti.
Were you going to throw up as well to celebrate the puke 6 that we saw last night from Chris Jefferson?
I'm glad you
I
said
would
that,
have too as far as he ran. Goodness. He ran so like it was 70 some yards, but he ran like 300 yards getting there. But now I have some thoughts, and it was heartbreaking, I guess is the best way. It was anticlimactic at the end. They just kind of took a sack, I mean, that's the game. But it's there's so many things going on with me right now, Dalton. Thanks for asking.
Well, let Sam regroup for a moment, and we'll get some of those thoughts that he does have. Tony, what was your takeaway from last night's game?
I feel like this was really the second week in a row we've had another Big Ten game, steal the spotlight. Other than the backyard brawl yesterday, the Purdue and Penn State was probably the best game on TV by far, and the same with Northwestern versus Nebraska last week.
How about the state of Pennsylvania just owning college football last night? Boy, did they have a moment. But go on.
Literally, for sure. Like both their big teams, got very good wins last night. I thought it was a good game. It's one of those I do kind of feel for Purdue. And probably the same with Sam. I got worried that last, half touchdown, right before the half, we're like, ooh. And I remember Sam was not happy. I don't blame him because I watched that.
I do believe there was some unfamily friendly response to that.
Some non-PG related language used, like PG-14. But it was one of those watching it. It was just odd because of what. It wasn't like Penn State was doing anything fancy. It was honestly, and Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, it was like your defense just forgot to tackle at times. I would watch
at times. That is the main reason Penn State was in position and didn't have to use a timeout to score that last touchdown. They could not tackle. They
had final drive and right before halftime. Those two sequences, tackling just went away.
It's like they recharged at the beginning, were recharged and fully charged at the beginning of the game, and then at halftime, but they their batteries died at the end.
Yeah,
and they just forgot how to tackle.
And you know what, Sam, for you, and I mean, because it is Pennsylvania, we'll chuck it up to Penn State cover themselves in butter. So that way, they can get those spin moves done a little bit easier.
So you're saying they cheated?
I mean, they're right.
Or is
close
that
to
me to analyze?
Is that against the rules?
I honestly, I don't know.
Nothing against having butter and or margarine on your uniforms. I mean, as long as you can't tell. As far as people know, we've seen players, pee themselves in the middle of the game. I mean, pea, butter, kind of same color. It's possible.
Whatever. Well, my biggest takeaway is I think Jeff Brom has to own this loss mostly.
Yep.
Because they had the ball at a perfect time to run the ball or make darn sure that those passes that you're going to use as runs are completed. They cannot be incomplete. So I hang that a good portion of the loss last night on them. Now the players have to execute. The players have to, tackle. They have to, prevent from getting silly penalties, but the coach didn't put them in the best position to winnow away that clock. And so, yes, there was so many things, even though they had suffered through the whole game, they were in position to win that game and could not tackle. And that is huge.
And to your point, I mean, you have to make Penn State use their timeouts.
Even though they didn't use it on the last drive, but they knew they had them, so they were able to take their time.
It changes things. You're absolutely right. And it's funny because Spencer Phillips, who's a part of Shutdown Fullcast, is one of the other programs I like listening to and consuming. He tweeted out, he said, this game is just Jeff Brom and James Franklin screaming and throwing a clock at each other like in the final 5 minutes. And it was so perfect of what we saw. But yeah, I thought the game management, the clock management at the end of the game was very poor. I thought it was dreadful. The missed tackling we covered. And the other thing was penalties. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. I don't know how many 3rd and longs Penn State got bailed out of just by bad penalties from Purdue. Yep. I mean, it was just a very undisciplined game by Purdue where you take all that aside, and obviously you can't really do all this, but you take that aside, I thought Purdue played the better game.
I was going to say, you know what? I am still not discouraged at Purdue's prospects for the season. Not at all, because I still think I have Penn State as the number 3 team in the East. They could be number 2 behind Ohio State. So Purdue had them, even though they played not their best game. They had them beat, just couldn't tackle. So, I mean, yes, I know that, like you said, you can't take those things away, but look at it was 35-31. So it wasn't a blowout. It wasn't, it was one possession. Purdue, if they would have pulled off a miracle and scored a touchdown, they would have won. Like 7 lead changes in the whole game. It was a good game. And even though Purdue struggled in some very key areas, it is also week 1.
Yeah. And I will say too, if I'm a Penn State fan, like I'm happy that you won, but I wouldn't be happy as in I have faith in this team. Because like we said, it seemed like tackling kind of went away. And I was watching Penn State. Sean Clifford, I mean, again, he's great with his legs. Throwing last night, he was not. They were not in sync. They were not good. And again, aside from missed tackling, they didn't have a whole lot of good explosive plays. Other than the last final drive, he throws it basically to the running back and gets into the pylon. That was beautiful. Other than that, it's like, ooh, this is an ugly game.
Well, and another red flag is, I mean, when I chatted with James Franklin a month and a half ago, he talked about, every year we go into the season and we say our offensive line is going to be better. And he says, I'm not going to say it this year. We're going to show it and you guys are going to say it, is what he said. Well, after week 1, you can't really say it. The offensive line play from Penn State was really pretty dismal, especially considering you're talking about a Purdue front that's missing George Karlaftis from a year ago. Like, this isn't an elite Purdue pass rushing attack that was on hand. And that's not that Purdue's bad, but there's too much there to still make up for Purdue. That wasn't great play by Purdue. It was bad play by Penn State, even though it can be a little bit of both.
One thing that I noticed, like their longest run came right before the pick six that Clifford threw, and then it was something like 8 yards. Like, they weren't running the ball very well either.
No.
But for the game, they ran for, hang on, because I had the number here, 98.
What did Purdue rush for?
Purdue ran for 70.
Yeah, which honestly should have been more, but we are not surprised by. They have a track record of 70 yards per game or whatever.
Yeah, this was a sloppy Big 12 game is what this was. It was just
it was almost like it was the jamboree from, growing up football, where you play one quarter against one team and another quarter against another. It didn't look like very cohesive, all of it together. And it just stinks that Purdue couldn't do it, because they did play well enough, or they would have gotten the doors blown off of them. So and maybe Penn State's better than I'm giving them credit for. That could be too.
Well, if we switch over to, I know Tony had mentioned a little bit of this. I don't know, Sam, if you caught some of this too, because it was happening the same time as Purdue Penn State, but the backyard brawl. I know it doesn't involve the Big Ten, but boy, you talk about a rivalry game with hatred, with passion. The crowd was insane. It's the biggest crowd ever in Pittsburgh sports history. It was an insane atmosphere as that rivalry's finally renewed after, what was it, 11 years?
I was going to say, I think it was like 10 or 11. Yeah, somewhere in there that they didn't play it.
And it was so iconic in the fact that you had so many moments in that game where you're like, what is going on? There were so many bad interceptions, so many different mistakes that just kept happening. That game was classic college football. That was really the announcement to me that we're back to being in college football season, because it was so perfectly imperfect. It was a must watch last night.
I didn't watch any of it, but I got like 7 notifications of things that happened in it. So it's like, what in the heck is going on in this game?
It was incredible. All the turnovers, the plays late. Pittsburgh finally evens it up at 31, and immediately Pitt 6, or I say Pitt 6 because that's what people were calling it, but there was a pick 6 for Pittsburgh right after that, like the next play, and they take the lead. And when they just hadn't been able to keep things moving for a while, you're like, what is happening? It was an iconic game. And much like Purdue Penn State, I think it had 6 or 7 lead changes as well. So it was another one of those just back and forth. Hey, I'm going to be honest, guys, between the backyard brawl, what we saw last night for Purdue Penn State, and last week with Nebraska Northwestern, we've had a lot of really good, in terms of entertaining, college football games so far. Maybe not good in terms of cleanliness, but in terms of entertainment, this has been a fun start to the year.
I was up voluntarily past midnight last night. Like that if that tells you, I mean, I want to be entertained. I am that guy. Entertain me. But it's honestly, I want Purdue to win, but as long as it's good football, don't get me wrong, this will get grayer if Purdue, puts me through this all the time and they don't come through. But I love good competitive football, and that's, or Purdue blowing people away, but that's being the fan of me, but I'm so excited that this season has finally started. I mean, yeah.
And we'll loop Tony in here in a moment too, but I had the thought last night, and had Purdue won, I was going to say, I think the Big Ten West champ could be the former Iowa Hawkeyes, now Purdue Boilermakers, because
I tell you what,
I mean, between Charlie Jones and Tracy, like Iowa, those receivers, those two looked like just poked their head out of Iowa City, looked around. They're like, does anybody else like actually throw the ball and kind of like have more of a high speed offense? And they're like, oh, let's go to Purdue. And Charlie Jones immediately, let me pull up his numbers, because what he did last night with O'Connell was incredible. He had 12 catches, 153 yards, and a touchdown. Tracy only ended up with 1 catch for 8 yards. But still, how ridiculous for those two Hawkeyes to play at the level they did.
He's the first guy that I've recognized wearing number 15 at Purdue since the early 2000s. Like, I just haven't paid attention to, nobody in number 15 had done anything to catch my eye, let's say it that way, since Drew Brees. And like, he was all over the place, and I'm like, who is this? I mean, I knew who he was, but I'm like, is this one of the guys? And I'm like, I'll be darned, go Iowa.
Yeah.
Iowa East.
I like that. Yeah.
Iowa's like, you know what? We can't win the West very well. We're just going to send all of our players to Purdue. It's still black. The yellow's a little bit off, but we'll still get our wins through that way.
It's the ally. I love that.
Yeah. Exactly.
But yeah, that was it's interesting. And before we put a bow on segment 1, because segment 2 will preview a lot of the games that are coming up this weekend and even tonight. But for segment 1, it's interesting. You come away from, and for the folks who are maybe just waking up and trying to figure out what happened last night, I know Sam gave the score, but 35-31, Penn State gets the win against Purdue. But as we've talked about, for whatever reason, it didn't bolster a ton of confidence in us in Penn State, but it kind of reassured some thoughts we might have in Purdue that, hey, if you just straighten yourself out, you have a real shot at the division title.
That's the biggest thing. You clean stuff up. You clean stuff up, and Jeff Brom make a few better choices at key points. Yeah. He's got stuff to clean up too. They do that. I'm confident still with my pick.
I was getting ready to say, I just want to throw it out there. My pick of Minnesota won clean last night, 38-0. My pick of Minnesota winning the Big Ten West is still running strong at the moment. They're 1-0.
Who'd they have?
New Mexico State.
Yeah, that's right.
A dub's a dub, Sam. A dub's a dub.
True.
No, I'm true. I'm glad Tony brought it up, because I wanted to mention that as well. The final was what, 38-0? Yes, 38-0. But 38-0, and you got to see Mo Ibrahim back. And look, I know you can't pick too much a part of this game, right? But Ibrahim, 21 carries, 132 yards, 2 touchdowns. The question was, would it be the Mo we know after the injuries he suffered? And last night, from what we can gather, was pretty solid.
That's average. They were playing New Mexico State.
That was the expectation.
Yep. Yeah. You should have gotten that in the first half. Come on.
If anything, like Minnesota honestly should have taken a page out of, and I'm just going to be the first to say it because they don't get a whole lot of love. Anchor down for Vandy, 63-10 against Hawaii. They needed to take a page out of Vanderbilt's book as far as this is what you need to do to a below average team.
You know what the coach told him and said, look, we're not coming back unless we win big.
Exactly.
This is Hawaii.
That's one of the things I was thinking about too. So Michigan starts the season with 4 home games, and they start with Colorado State, Hawaii, and I'm blanking on the third at the moment. But that Hawaii home game, man, you got to make that a road game. You got to go to Honolulu.
Do a home and home.
You got to schedule that.
Well, I would think that would be how Hawaii could get some big teams, like they get the payday or whatever, but hey, we'll take a bigger payday if you guys do a home and home, and then they bring all their fans with them.
Here we go. So Michigan plays Colorado State at Michigan, Hawaii, UConn, and Maryland.
UConn, that's right, in Maryland.
Wow.
And Ohio State starts here with 5 home games, so yeah. But at least they start against Notre Dame, so we give credit there.
No, you don't give credit.
I laid credit out, and Sam just took it back.
Just swatted it away like Dikembe Mutombo.
That's that teacher and Sam like, no, you don't just get credit. You got to earn it.
I don't remember what I was going to say. Let's move on.
All right. We'll move to segment 2. We're going to talk about some of the games coming up this weekend. All right, tonight we have 2 games on tap. Michigan State will open up the season after the biggest turnaround in school history. between the last 2 years. In 2020, they won 2 games. Last year, winning 11 games. Can Mel Tucker and Michigan State keep the momentum going? Can they finish maybe second in the East, like Sam's talking about, for the Spartans this season, just behind Ohio State? They open up with Western Michigan tonight at 7 o'clock. I know Tony's got a little bit of a Spartan interest as well, so I'll start with Tony. What are you expecting to see? What are you maybe hoping to see in tonight's game?
The biggest thing I'm hoping to see is an improvement on the defense, because that defense was honestly Michigan State's biggest Achilles heel last year. Peyton Thorne obviously had a great year. Of course, Kenneth Walker was absolutely amazing last year, and I think most everybody agrees. Kind of disrespectful to Kenneth Walker that he didn't even get considered in New York for a Heisman other than a quarterback. But the defense last year was just bad. And like you said, the improvement to go from basically the bottom of the Big Ten East to 11-2, they did end up losing to Purdue. But I also found out Purdue ended up beating number 2 Iowa and number 3 Michigan State last year too. So this was
the year of the Boilermakers.
It was the year of the Boilermakers. So I'm interested to see, has Mel Tucker improved on that defense? I think he's a good enough coach that this is going to be a Michigan State team that's going to be more consistent, more consistently back. And offensively, I'm also interested to see, because we know Jalen Naylor left for the draft. Kenneth Walker left for the draft. So there's a little bit of some pieces, but I still think they can make it work. Like I said, the biggest thing I'm worried about that, kind of kept me worried all last year was that defense. Against Michigan, ended up getting lucky with that last interception to, seal away the game. That was probably the biggest upset win that Michigan State could have done. And then, of course, once Michigan State lost to Purdue, Ohio State first, and that was just ugly. I saw that and I was like, oh, not even competitive. Come on. Like, at least with Michigan,
56 to nothing at the half.
It was. I think it ended up finishing 56-7. So I'm like, yeah, because Ohio State was
Keon Coleman with a touchdown.
We'll put in all the freshmen. It'll be fine. But yeah, I just hope the defense has gotten better, because again, if they can, I think Michigan State can be one of those. They'll be another dangerous team coming out of the Big Ten.
Well, let's talk about that defense for a moment then, because it's interesting if you really start to kind of parse away what Michigan State did. The rush defense, not so bad. 4th in the Big Ten last year, 15th in the country. They gave up 117 yards per game. The issue is pass defense. They gave up 325 yards a game through the air, which ranked 130th in the nation. I mean, that's pretty rough. Like, Mel Tucker's talked about it, and he goes, look, you can't really get much worse than that. Like, we're going to be better in the secondary, because the bar is where it was from last year. But it's interesting, too, because you take a look at the secondary, and Mel Tucker's still bringing some transfers in. And what you start noticing, too, so Chester Kimbrough comes back, right? And he's a transfer from Florida. Ronald Williams comes back. He's a transfer from Alabama. This year, Amir Speed transfers in from Georgia, and Amir Speed's the biggest cornerback I've ever seen in person. He's 6'3", 6'4". I mean, the guy's a monster out there. But then you bring back, so that's an all SEC secondary when you look at the corners. And then you take a look, Xavier Henderson's back yet again. That's big news. One of the top 3 tacklers on the team, and of course a captain. Angelo Gross comes back at safety as well. You start mixing that talent together, there is a belief that they will take a step forward. Will it be world-class? Will it be top of the Big Ten? Probably not, but will it be a jump from last year? It seems to be. Now, also, too, because I know Sam wants to jump in, but Michigan State's front 7 is something to pay attention to, and especially tonight, Western's a team coming into this that only has 4 starters returning on offense, and they lose their quarterback. Ellaby is gone. They have a few receivers to replace. I think they have 2 starting offensive linemen back. But where Western is good is the running backs. Western had the 17th best rushing offense in the country last year, and the top 2 running backs are back once again. Sean Tyler and former Michigan State running back who transferred out, Ladarius Jefferson. They combined for about 2,000 yards last season. So Western is going to want to establish a run game, because that's what they got in week 1 in terms of experience and some veteranship. Michigan State's front 7, Between that linebacking core of Cal Halliday, Darius Snow, Jacoby Windman, Aaron Brule, and then you look at that front with Chris Bogle, another transfer from Florida, Jacob Slade there in the interior. There's a lot of reason to be confident in that front seven. And my point, big picture, is maybe that helps alleviate that secondary a little bit with how strong that front seven can be. They might be able to play complementary football on that side of the field this season. I rambled a lot there. Nobody had nothing else to throw on that, did they? We can move on.
I was waiting for Sam. It was like, all right, is Sam like just building up the suspense?
No,
like,
I was just waiting for you. Dalton, I was waiting for you to go at the end of it. That's what I was waiting for. I didn't want to be talking over that.
Go ahead.
I don't foresee Michigan State losing tonight. That's it.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I can't add to that. I was going to say that you and probably only the person from Western Michigan knows that much about Western Michigan. I'm sorry.
Well, hopefully that's helpful for folks tonight that are tuning in.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, man, Dalton knows a lot about Western Michigan. I was like,
it's game week, so
Western Michigan.
It's game week, so he studies too.
What we should do too, maybe real quick, let's look at Michigan State's offense so we can kind of project that throughout the season as well. Peyton Thorne's back. To Tony's point, Kenneth Walker III's gone, and as when we were talking with Mel Tucker about a month ago, I said, canines don't grow on trees. You kind of wish they did. But what's kind of the plan moving forward? And of course, they got two transfers that come in. Jarek Broussard comes in from Colorado, who actually knows Mel Tucker a little bit from when he was there in 2019 before coming to Michigan State. Jalen Berger transfers in from Wisconsin. You still have Elijah Collins. You still have Jordan Simmons. It might be a deal where it's kind of by committee with the running backs. We haven't really seen a full commitment from the staff in terms of who's going to be getting the touches, who's going to be getting the carries. So that's something to watch for tonight. Also, Jayden Reed is back. Big question is, and what we believe is that he's going to be doing a lot of special team stuff again this year. Remember, he had 2 punt returns for touchdowns last year, one to save the game against Nebraska he ended up having. But who else really steps up at receiver? Keon Coleman, somebody to pay attention to as we move throughout the season. A lot of the players are saying he's going to be the breakout guy. Montorie Foster, Trey Mosley, and then the other big thing is to watch the offensive line, because the offensive line last year was bailed out a lot by Kenneth Walker III. The offensive line coach, Chris Kapilovic, called him the eraser because he just erases all the mistakes the offensive line used to make. So watching how that develops will be interesting as well, and will really kind of determine what Michigan State can do offensively throughout the year.
Yeah, I think that if there's any sort of toss-up, and correct me or tell me if you disagree with this on either one of you, is if there's going to be a question mark in Michigan State's existence, it is going to be their offense.
I think it's two parts. I think it's specifically the offensive line when it comes to offense.
We're going to narrow it even more on the offense. Okay.
Yeah. And I think Tony's thing is about the secondary is legit. I mean, he finished 130th last year. Like that's a question. If you can't defend the pass, you can't win.
The way I look at that, though, is I think Tucker's right. You know, you're only going to get better when you're that bad.
True.
I mean, and honestly, you're laughing, and I chuckled when I thought it, but it's honestly, we can't be worse unless we're giving up touchdowns on every pass, which that's just not going to happen.
Yeah,
he's not going to be wrong. At the very least, they'll be the same.
Yeah, because you got to think, looking at their schedule last year, the 2 lowest scoring games that Michigan State allowed, they were both away games. They were at Rutgers and at Indiana consecutively. At Rutgers, they allowed Rutgers to score 13 points. In Indiana, they allowed them to score 15. Other than that, it was at least 20 points or more, with the exception of Miami. They let Miami score 17 and Youngstown State 14. So, I mean, take that for what you will. The rest of them, it was 20 points or more at least. And against the bigger opponents, it was just ugly. Let's see. I know Ohio State obviously 56. Michigan, they let them score 33. Purdue dropped 40 on them. Penn State was able to get 27. Western Kentucky, even though I know Western Kentucky, Bailey Zapp was just throwing the ball.
They were built
everywhere.
for that.
they dropped 31. So it's like, yeah, like Dalton said, the passing secondary is what really had me worried. Because I would notice it's like, okay, Michigan State's about to get to the quarterback. Like that pass rush is there. But that secondary, as I'm watching, I'm like, oh my God, it's just where's the safety help? Where's the corner? What happened?
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to say something, excuse me, really quick about I try to be, I know it's not always apparent, Dalton, but I always try to find the silver lining in things.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to try to shed a little bit of light on my silver lining for the transfer portal being so open and able to jump into.
Okay.
Let's think about this. If Kenneth Walker III doesn't transfer to Michigan State, does he have the same season he had last year at Wake Forest?
Wake Forest told him he didn't fit the offense.
So
I mean, that was a real thing that happened. And then Kenneth Walker won the Doak Walker Award in East Lansing. So to your point, correct.
So that is a silver lining, that these kids are getting told or just don't fit, but they're forced to stay, or it's a longer process than they want to try to put effort into. The ability to change to an environment that better suits them and is more conducive to their success. That is a very huge plus to the transfer portal, and the ability to move schools as freely as they can now. Now, there are jerks that take advantage of the system. We all know, those things happen, but at least there is some good stuff coming from it, because to the likes of Kenneth Walker III, there's plenty of others that just get into an environment that better suits them. It's not that they're looking for the best team necessarily. They want the environment that makes them feel like it's home,
And in a lot of situations that ends up building a big career. Jayden Reed transferred in from Western Michigan. He's going against a former team tonight. He's not a MAC receiver. You see what he did last year? Like, and some of that is just negligence on college scouting. Yeah. And honestly, I mean, it's not a perfect system, right? You're trying to evaluate human beings playing a sport. Like you're going to have mistakes. Sometimes things like that happen.
At different route or speeds too.
Too. And this gives them an opportunity to play at an appropriate level. To Sam's point, I mean, there's a lot of messes with the transfer portal. There's a lot of things that need cleaned up, and a lot of it you got to go case by case. But there is a lot of good that has come out of the portal as well. It's just very Jekyll and Hyde. It seems to be extreme one way or the other.
I just think that it's going to take a good coach is going to be successful by, yes, playing the transfer portal, but finding the players that fit their program, not just, ooh, he's the best, and just start grabbing. What are you going to do for us? Okay, I think we can do that for you. You can do this for us. We're going to be a good fit. They are much more successful. So maybe we're seeing better football from the ability for those kids to do that.
Yeah. And Sam, you probably know this too, different teachers, different coaches will have, different product out of students and out of athletes as well. Because, like Wake Forest said, oh, we don't feel like you fit the offense. Kenneth said, okay, well, I want to go to Michigan State. Mel Tucker probably said, oh no, you can fit this offense. Like, no problem.
We'll build it around you. How about that?
Yeah.
It's kind of what happened.
We'll run it through you.
Yeah. And I do think, like, much to like both of your points, it is a little bit messy, and I think it gets even more messier, if you look at, because probably a lot of people pay attention mainly to like the quarterbacks moving, because obviously the quarterback is the Mercedes-Benz of the positions to pay attention to. So we see Spencer Rattler go to South Carolina. That was a mess in Oklahoma. Caleb Williams follows Lincoln Riley to USC, and people are like, oh man, USC poached all the talent out of Oklahoma, and it's like, well, kind of, but again, it's one of those players, they're used to Lincoln. They know his system. They know they can be productive. And I mean, they're going to the Pac-12, which the Pac-12, much like the Big 12, it's not like they're a heavy defensive fronted conference. So it's like, okay, we can still be successful and still produce at a high level if we follow him.
Well, and the simple argument, sorry, Sam. No, I just was going to throw the rule or saying that people throw out there all the time is, if a coach can pick up and leave at any point, why can't the player as well? To Tony's, and that's, I mean, it's a fair conversation to have. Go ahead, Sam.
No, I totally 100% agree with that. I would like not to be happening every single year, but whatever. I really, honestly, if that's what they want to do, it just looks bad on you that you can't play for a coach for more than a couple of seasons.
And there is something to that sentiment, but my big thing is the problem with the transfer portal is the lack of rules that go along with it. The idea that somebody goes somewhere, I mean, so be it. That's today's day and age. That is society today. It's reflective of everything going on. But the idea that people there's no time windows, which finally is starting to be established by the NCAA and folks. But there needs to be something to make roster management reasonable and realistic. Like there has to be guidelines put in place to allow coaches and programs to be organized. It doesn't mean players lose freedom. There's just rules about how you go about it. Like that needs to be happening.
Well, and I totally 100% agree. But honestly, the whole farcical statement of you choose a school, not a coach to play football. No. Come on. We're not stupid. Kids, if they connect with a coach, they are going to go where the coach is. Maybe that's what happened with the Oklahoma to USC. I really connected with Coach Riley.
Well, Tony is wearing an LSU shirt right now. He might have danced with Brian Kelly down in Baton Rouge. He feels a connection.
We had a personal conversation off the air, and I'm going to divulge it. He said he was in line, but they cut it off before.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I'll be 100% honest. Also, being an LSU fan, I'll follow Ed Orgeron anywhere. I mean, that man, I'd follow him.
I heard
say "Go Tigers" one more time. I'd follow Ed.
I heard one of the best stories from him about Joe Burrow, and I think I've told Dalton about it before. But he said that when they were recruiting to have him come down or transfer to LSU, he brought him into a room full of coaches and said, within 10 minutes, I knew he was the smartest guy in the room. Somebody went and told Joe Burrow that, and he goes, I knew in 5. And that was it. And he walked away.
It's so good.
Yeah. It's more of a Joe Burrow story, but
and Ed's got quite a few of those. He's got some Adrian Peterson recruiting stories too that you might want to check out sometime. Okay, so we've previewed a lot. We still got some games we haven't even gotten to. I tell you what, in the second half, let's run through the rest of these games that are coming up this week, and including the big one, Ohio State Notre Dame. It's a top 5 matchup. I know, but
let's just call it that.
We'll get to all of that in just a moment when we come back from halftime.
You are listening to Big 10 Plus 4, hosted on Anchor and StreamYard.
Hi, I'm Lauren.
And I'm John.
And we host the Beard Owl Podcast, the podcast where we talk about 2 of the greatest things in the world, beer and Weird Al.
And a bunch of other stuff.
That's right. Do you like nostalgia? Do you like sibling banter? Do you like beer? Do you like Weird Al? Are you human?
If you answered yes to any of those questions, give us a listen. Become one of our loyal commenters.
Hey, you there. We've got a question for you. Are you tired of clickbait stories and the loudest voices driving discussions in culture and entertainment?
If so, I'm Dylan.
I'm Kendall.
And I'm Corey. And we host the podcast From the Middle. We're middle-class guys living in the middle of America, in the middle chapters of our lives with points of view somewhere in the middle.
We take a more reasonable and centrist approach in our discussions covering genres like comedy, culture, entertainment, and interviews, with really interesting folks like business owners, comic creators, doctors, news anchors, New York Times best-selling illustrators, professional stand-up comics, and more. We really value a relaxed and conversational podcast, one that we hope is so fun and laid back, you'll forget you're not actually hanging out with us.
So search at From the Mid Pod, just like it sounds, or check us out everywhere you can find podcasts.
All right, third quarter, second half, and as we continue to go through game previews, we'll put a bow on Michigan State, Western Michigan with a couple of picks. We've talked a lot about the game. Tony, and here we're not doing spreads, we're just doing straight up. Michigan State, Western Michigan.
Oh, Michigan State.
Sam?
48-17, Michigan State.
Ooh, okay. And I'll go Michigan State as well. Tonight, there's another Big Ten game. Illinois and Indiana will be kicking off at 8 o'clock. And Sam has fallen asleep in the middle of this one.
Already. It's 12 hours before kickoff. Sam is already done for the night.
But this one, I don't know if you want to try and muster up some attraction about this game. Illinois last week against Wyoming looked pretty well. Chase Brown at running back was pretty solid. Tommy DeVito at quarterback was pretty strong. Indiana doesn't have a ton of interest behind it, and that kind of hurts me to say because I love Tom Allen. I love what he's built there, but there's not a lot of excitement heading into this year. They're going to have a new quarterback. That's going to be something to pay attention to when the team trots out there. This still hasn't been announced. I believe we're going to see maybe the fifth-year senior Jack Tuttle take over the reins for the old Michael Penix offense, but we still have to wait and see. But Indiana, Illinois, what is there that sticks out to you guys?
Both teams start with I.
Yeah. I did watch part of the
I like
Illinois.
orange better than red. I don't know.
Yeah, I did watch the Illinois thumping of Wyoming a little bit, and that was something we kind of figured would happen. Wyoming ended up actually losing one of their best wide receivers to Texas. They lost one of their key, I think, defensive starters to Alabama. Surprisingly, I was like, wait, I'm sorry, Alabama took a Wyoming player? Oh, confusion. So confused. Yeah, other than that, it's nothing really to me. I got so excited, and this is going to sound really weird when I say this, so just hear me out to the end of this. I got really excited during the COVID football season, because that was the year that Indiana just came out of the blue. They ended up being ranked as high as number 7 that year, and ever since then, it's just been downhill, stereotypical Indiana. Like, I don't know what happened. Like, Michael Penix was great. The offense was great. The defense was great. They kept, stride and stride with Ohio State all the way to the very end, ended up losing by a touchdown. And, now it's like, yeah, there's nothing really sexy. There's nothing exciting to see from, Indiana now. And I'm just like, man, we're going to get beat by the Illinois alumni and their knockoff Chicago Bears throwback uniform. That's fantastic.
Can I say that I'm always rooting for Purdue, but I always like that really dark horse story for the year. I would love
Indiana to win. Really, Sam?
To see Illinois
That's what I heard.
be 4-0 going into their murderer's row of a schedule and picking off 3 or 4 of those. They've got like 6 right in a row, and they just have that dark horse of a season. Then all of a sudden, none of us are right because Illinois is winning the West. I don't think it will happen, but I always kind of just like, ooh, come on,
Well, and I pulled up their schedule. Sorry, I didn't mean to interject. I was going to help support that. So Wyoming was a win. Indiana tonight. We'll see what happens. Virginia is next, and then Chattanooga after that. That's the first 4. So to your point about 4-0, it's possible. And then it's at Wisconsin, hosting Iowa, hosting Minnesota, at Nebraska, hosting Michigan State, hosting Purdue, at Michigan, and then at Northwestern.
And that's what I'm getting at is I don't think they're going undefeated. Don't get me wrong. I made this statement last week. You literally could see Illinois be 4-0, probably ranked at least in the low 20s. And then at the end of that being 4-8. You could totally see it.
Yeah, it's possible. Real quick, let's get picks then. Are we going Illinois, Indiana? Tony?
I'm going to go with the underdog. I didn't do it last week, because I thought Nebraska was going to win. I was like, oops. I'm going to go with Indiana.
The Big Ten West pick looks real good right now. So
I'm going to say Indiana proves Sam wrong. I'm going to say they come out. They win by 3. They win by a field goal.
Okay.
I don't know this name you're speaking about. I only know that IU plays Illinois tonight. I like orange better than red. Illinois wins 17-13 in overtime. I don't
now, Sam, I do got to ask real quick before Dalton goes. Are you going to be a little bit mad if Indiana wins and at the end of this, IU is the only team in the state of Indiana that has a win?
Yeah, because Ball State got thumped by Tennessee last night.
That was ugly.
Notre Dame, we'll talk about that, probably will not win this week. And no, because you know what? Even though Purdue played like a dumpster fire every once in a while, they should have beaten a really good Penn State team. And if IU wins, they're only beating Illinois.
Okay, Sam getting the silver lining. He's staying true to his word. I'm going to go with Illinois tonight as well. And a lot of this week one matchups, it's a lot of pretty lopsided matchups, non-conference matchups. We don't have any other true Big Ten games for tomorrow. But let's talk about a couple. One that we won't talk about just for time's sake, Rutgers at Boston College. That should be interesting for the Rutgers program. It's something to pay attention to for the Schiano era, if you want me to try and draw up the headlines, which I do think there is some intrigue. I'm at least interested.
Piscataway has newspapers.
But one of the other ones, Michigan and Colorado State. Now, Michigan's 30.5-point favorites in this game against Colorado State. But the reason why I want to talk about Michigan for a moment is because the starting quarterback situation. Week one, it's been announced that Cade McNamara will be the starter, so he's going to start tomorrow, as we're already getting head shakes from both Sam and Tony. Week two, the starter, it's been announced, will be J.J. McCarthy. So going with the two quarterbacks, Sam is lip-saying to you that it is dumb. Sam, tell us why you think it is dumb.
I have been saying this since the start of, we're not sure. We've got two really good quarterbacks came out. You know, the statement of we're evaluating. You do not want to run into a season where you don't have one starting quarterback. You will Cade McNamara, what happens if he throws for 7 touchdowns, only throws 1 incomplete pass, and now Jim Harbaugh has put himself in a corner because he's got to start the other guy the second week because he's announced it already. And what happens when he has to recant that because Cade McNamara threw for 7 touchdowns? Put on your big boy Walmart khakis and just name one starter, please. I'm not a Michigan fan, but I feel for those fans who are going to have to muddle through this season with this. I don't get it.
Yeah, that's probably the craziest part is that, you know, that Coach Harbaugh comes out and says, you know, this is going to be my guy week 1. This is going to be my guy week 2. And then week 3, I'll have an answer for you. Why? You had all of last season with both quarterbacks. It's not like you're just fresh getting one and you're like, oh man,
NFL, Tony.
Huh?
He was worried about the NFL.
That's true. That's true. That Vikings job, you know, hey, you're real close. It's still cold. Well, at least you're in a dome for, you know, 8-9 games.
No, they play outdoors now.
Who, Minnesota?
Yeah.
Oh, do they?
Yeah. Did you not know this?
No.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute.
The Metrodome's been closed for a while.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. But no, I mean, you've had all of last year. You won the Big Ten, you know, with them. You know, more to Ohio State, you know, having dropped a game to Oregon, and then their defense also being abysmally bad. But now you come into the off season. You come into train, you know, their version of training camp, the spring games. And then the first 2 games of the season, you still can't commit to one. Like, what is going on? Because don't get me wrong, do you maybe have 2 great quarterbacks? Very possible. We've seen it. University
Joe
of
Montana
Alabama
and Steve Young were on the same team at one point.
Exactly. And this was a, you know, Steve Young that was previously on Tampa Bay was like, man, this guy is terrible. Get rid of him. San Francisco picks him up, and then we know the rest is history. But, you know, the fact that it's going to take you 3 weeks into your season to decide who you want to go with is just kind of mind-boggling. And you know what I honestly think it is? I think Coach Harbaugh wants to pick Cade because he was primarily the starter last season. But there's a lot of people, it's like, no, you've got this young, talented guy in McCarthy. You need to start him. And I don't think Coach wants to pull the trigger on that yet. Why? I don't know. But I don't think he does.
And Tony's starting to hit something important. The context of this is really, really fascinating because as we talked about, Michigan wins their first Big Ten championship in 17 seasons, and Cade McNamara is able to quarterback that team, plays more of a game manager style, right? I mean, he's managing the game whenever he's out there taking the snaps for the Wolverines. But then you have J.J. McCarthy, who's this talented, athletic guy, and they believe can maybe change the ceiling, that the potential changes when he's out there because he's able to do different things. He's able to maybe make more plays. But on top of that, he's also a 5-star recruit in a program that hasn't had too many 5-star quarterbacks, at least in recent times, there at Michigan. And do you risk the idea of having a 5-star recruit quarterback come in and transfer out because he's not getting playing time? And what message does that send to other recruits in the future? That's part of the context that's building into this whole thing. Like it or not, that's just part of what is actually soaking into some of this, that's going into some of this decision making.
That's the nastiness of the transfer portal. You take off a kid just because there is obviously somebody that's better at this
sorry,
point.
For some reason, my phone's tripping out.
Let me be clear. we're getting Tony in. Let me be clear too. I'm not saying that it's the sole reason that J.J. McCarthy is being in contention. I just don't want listeners to be confused by that either. I'm not saying that's the sole reason, but there's a lot of ingredients here, and keeping all these ingredients in mind is important.
My question is when did Coach Harbaugh start worrying about that? You know, at what point did he say, "Hey, I need to appease"? If this is the case,
right?
You know, when he started that, because he's never been anybody tells him what to do. I mean, it didn't. I mean, what was the beef between him and Pete Carroll when he was at Stanford?
The handshake.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was with the 49ers. I think it was a Seahawks 49ers game.
No, I'm talking about, like, I forget, one of them was running the score up, and Harbaugh or Pete Carroll, I think it might have been the year that Stanford was good, maybe, and just really thumped them or something. And I don't remember. I know he pulled the biggest spread upset ever in college history when he beat USC when Stanford was like a big dumpster fire. But whole point on this is Coach Harbaugh is never let somebody tell him what he should and shouldn't do. Mm-hmm. I mean, it just so if that is the case, I'm shocked that might be the case.
And if we're talking about some of the ingredients that go into this situation too, another one to keep in mind, last year you had an elite defense. You had Aiden Hutchinson set a school record for sacks. You had David Ajabo on the other end. You had Dax Hill. You had Josh Ross. Your defense was lights out. You relied on your defense to win you games. And then offensively, against Ohio State, the biggest game of the year for you, you hand the ball off and Hassan Haskins scores 5 rushing touchdowns against Ohio State. That's how you win that game. You don't have Haskins. You don't have that elite defense, even though some people believe Michigan's defense will still be really, really good, that the newcomers are going to be able to play at a high level. You don't have everything that you leaned on last year. Does that maybe create a little bit of a fear where the team is saying, we've got to find a way to take other parts to a new level? Maybe J.J. McCarthy, because his style is more free, it's more playmaking. Maybe he's the ticket to help us elevate our offense to a different level, because we can't rely on the same defense that we had last year. We can't rely on handing the ball off to Haskins. Maybe we need to take our game to a new level, and McNamara's taking us as high as he can. Maybe McCarthy can a little bit more. So that's what, as we're talking about all these ingredients, is something to keep in mind. But in the interest of time, we'll close that conversation. Just remember, McNamara starts week 1. McCarthy starts week 2. I think we have Tony back here, and it's going to be perfect timing because we got to preview the last game that we're going to talk about, the top 5 matchup from the shoe in Columbus.
I thought we were going to talk about Wisconsin, Southern Illinois.
You know, I had South Dakota State and Iowa.
South Dakota. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I don't even remember if that's who Wisconsin
plays. We have number 2 Ohio State, number 5 Notre Dame, 7:30 kick Saturday night. For this game, as you go into a top 5 matchup to open up the season. So exciting. The spread is 17 points, I believe, as we're talking right now, in favor of Ohio State. Not many people giving Notre Dame a real shot. How do we feel? Tony, I know you're already going mobile a little bit. Let's get you on first. Oh, let's go Sam first.
He was so shocked by it. He left. He just gone.
He wasn't ready to make
I'm out of here. Is it possible to reinstate ties just for one game?
You don't want to see either of these teams win?
No, and here's the thing. I think Ohio State's the better team. I just think they are. They're and honestly, my knee-jerk reaction to when you said 17 was not enough. That was my thought. The only thing, the only thing that I think will save Notre Dame is if they can establish a run game, and that defense for Ohio State is still suspect like it was.
Okay.
And honestly, Notre Dame's not bad. They're not number 5 by accident, everyone. Come on. Even though I like to talk them down, I'm a Purdue fan who grew up only watching Purdue Notre Dame on TV growing up because I didn't have cable. Okay. I don't like Notre Dame for that. I'm not dumb enough to think they're not good. So they're number 5. They're a good football team. I just don't know if they've got enough. I honestly think Ohio State's underranked personally.
Underranked at number 2.
Yes. I honestly think they're the best team. I've kind of looked at rosters of best.
Sam,
I think
Alabama brings back the Heisman Trophy winner, and they bring back the best defender in the country.
I don't care.
Why don't you care?
Because I have seen Ohio State dismantle teams methodically. And yes, Alabama is really damn good. Don't get me wrong. I just think they should be flip-flopped. I think Ohio State is the better team of the two.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And you know what? You know what I think it is? I think it's because Sam is still stuck on the fact that Alabama was actually in a rebuilding year last year. In case people don't know, rebuild can include you winning the SEC and going to a national championship. So that's why I think Sam is a little bit hesitant on admitting that, Alabama should be ranked number 1. Which,
Tony, their rebuild year consisted of one of their players winning the Heisman and another one being like, well, maybe he was the better player on the team.
Yeah, that's all rebuild. Keep that in mind. That's all rebuild.
Yeah,
Alabama has. They only reload, that stupid cliche of we don't rebuild, we reload. That's exactly what they do. So if anything, I maybe there's some spite out of that feeling that Alabama's not the number 1 team, but I just think Ohio State, if they have truly, and they did a lot to try to get that defense better. They brought in a new coordinator. I mean, they are revamping. So I can only think that it's only going to be a better secondary. It's going to be a better defense than what it was last year. I think Ohio State's the better team if you matched them up right now against anybody.
Real quick, before we get to this game preview, since Sam is explicitly throwing out his demise for Notre Dame a little bit, do you find, because I've seen notice a little bit of a fan culture shift in college football where Notre Dame, which is normally like the New York Yankees of college football, has maybe become a little bit more likable with Marcus Freeman as the face of the program? A lot of people seem drawn to Freeman. They like Freeman. Are you in that same boat?
I from what I've seen from Freeman, absolutely, I like him. I still hate Notre Dame, but that's a personal feeling. You know what I mean?
But does that take away the luster a little bit at all with Freeman being the face?
You mean the luster of my hate?
Yes, absolutely.
It maybe takes it down a couple of brightness notches, but it's still very glaring. I hope that if Purdue plays Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame, that Purdue just wipes the floor with them. I hope that most teams that play Notre Dame wipe the floor with them. That's just me as a growing up Purdue fan who saw them get thumped by Notre Dame every 2 years, and that was the only game I ever saw Purdue play on TV.
All right,
there is a reason.
Let's preview and get to game picks. Ohio State, again, had the number 1 offense in the country last year, scoring 46 points a game. They bring back C.J. Stroud. They bring back Jackson Smith and Jigba. They bring back Travion Henderson. On defense, as Sam alluded to, rush defense specifically was the Achilles heel for the Buckeyes last year. They nabbed Jim Knowles from Oklahoma State. He's a new defensive coordinator. They're trying to switch things schematically to see if that can't fix the problems that were there in Columbus and can't lead to maybe an even higher mark where they get back to being the kings of the Big Ten Conference like they had been in years past. On the Notre Dame side, you're now dealing with a new quarterback. Sophomore Tyler Buckner will get the start at quarterback. Jack Cohn, of course, was the quarterback last year. And a little bit kind of like our conversation about McNamara and McCarthy. Jack Cohn, a little bit more of the Cade McNamara. Tyler Buckner, a little bit more of the J.J. McCarthy. And Notre Dame used both of those quarterbacks a little bit last year. Buckner in some different spots, kind of like what Michigan did with McCarthy. So we'll see what he's able to do. They bring back Michael Mayer at tight end, and Notre Dame's defensive line is the real deal. All of that being said, let's get your picks. Tony, I know you're kind of in and out, mobile and whatnot. If you're with us, what's your pick?
I'm, as much as I don't want to, I'm going to go with Ohio State. I think offensively they have too many weapons to be able to utilize over Notre Dame's defense. I think Notre Dame's defense is going to be good, but to have to compensate for C.J. Stroud, Smith and Jigba, Henderson at running back just by itself, I don't know if Notre Dame will be able to really combat that in the way that they would need to. So I'm going to have to go with Ohio State, unfortunately.
Sam?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, unless the defense is just absolutely as the rush defense especially is the dumpster fire-ish thing that it was against Michigan, and it still hasn't improved, and it's still, then Notre Dame's got at least a puncher's chance. I don't see that happening, and I don't see Notre Dame being able to hang with Ohio State. So yeah, Ohio State.
I'm going Ohio State too, and I can just leave it point blank.
Yeah,
they just are more talented. There's tiers to college football, and Ohio State is one of the elites right now.
Here's a quick question before we move to the fourth quarter: is if you were to ask, what is your preview of every game for each Alabama and Ohio State? Is there a team that matches up with one of those guys better that you think, well, they might be only a 3-point underdog or a 5-point underdog, whereas most of the time it's going to be, well, if they can play the perfect game, they can win.
I mean, you got a couple of teams traditionally that just give Alabama fits just because.
Texas A&M.
That's the one I think of, and of course with the Jimbo little thing there, maybe that's one I would circle if I'm trying to play this game. For Ohio State, I feel like their collapses are just random. Purdue in 2018, random. The blowout they suffered in Iowa City, random. There was nothing matchup-wise that went into that. It just was random. Like, it's kind of a roulette with Ohio State.
So it's one of those that if Ohio State's going to lose this year, and that's kind of what I feel like is it's going to be their own fault.
And that's been the case for the last 6 years for the most part. I mean, it's except for when you get to the playoff and maybe you're going against an Alabama or
that's just
you lose
better.
A heartbreaker with Clemson, like you're matching up with somebody kind of on the same talent span. But that's kind of been the case. The game against Michigan, they were out toughed.
I'm sorry, that's the exception to the rule. It's not the rule. You know what I mean? They don't have just a team that matches up with them perfectly.
Agreed.
Like Texas A&M does to Alabama. And that goes back as far as Johnny Manziel.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's only what 8 or 9 years, but I mean, still the point being is Texas A&M's had Saban's number at some point, at some extent. So it's I just think Ohio State's better. I hate saying it. It like puts a bad taste in my mouth. Like I'm gonna have to go brush my teeth afterwards. It's gonna happen.
Well, let's get a little closer. Let's move to the fourth quarter and get the headlines. All right, Tony, from the driver's seat, what do we got for the headline?
Oh man, it's me. I after watching the backyard brawl last night, I kind of stepped away and I looked at both the quarterbacks. Both were transfers. Keaton Slovis came from USC, and then of course JT Daniels came from that Georgia team. I think this had already been the first time JT Daniels had transferred. Second time JT Daniels has transferred as well.
He was originally from USC as well.
Yeah. So watching both, I think both quarterbacks are going to be able to bring their teams back to at least being competitive. I don't know about, championship aspirations. I think, Pittsburgh probably has a little bit more, especially considering they were able to win the ACC last year. But I think both quarterbacks are great for each program. I think they played great last night. Even though the interceptions say a little bit different, overall, it was a fun game. It was a competitive game. And I think both quarterbacks are going to do well for their programs.
Okay. Quarterbacks from the backyard brawl, two West Coast California kids leading their teams and maybe taking them to some new heights. Sam in the Sam Sentinel, what do we have?
There we go.
Okay. 15 years ago yesterday. This is September 2nd.
I love this.
This is September 2nd, 2022. 15 years ago yesterday. It is the anniversary of the most notable upset that I have ever witnessed. I wasn't in person, but oh my goodness, was I dancing around. That was when the then Division II or 1AA, whatever they called it back then, the division below the Big Ten, App State Mountaineers went into the Big House and shocked the football world and beat the then 5 ranked Michigan Wolverines on a blocked field goal. Amazing. It was one of those that I had the TV on where it was, I think it was the ESPN goal line where they jumped around to different games. So I was catching like every scoring opportunity that came up in that game. And I was amazed. So I flipped over to the game because I believe it was on ESPN or Big Ten Network. Doesn't matter.
It was on Big Ten Network because I have a story about that after you finish.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So it was on Big Ten Network. So I flipped it over there to it, watched it, and I was dancing around. It would be the equivalency of like a junior high basketball team going in and beating a college team. Like it just didn't make sense. But I have had conversations about this is why in the world, when you're Michigan, are you scheduling the best of the Division II teams? Now, if you're going to play Division II teams, you don't take the best one because they might beat you.
Mm-hmm.
So don't go after them. App State since then has and honestly could be a reason behind their rise into where they're at now was that win. They put themselves on the map. They brought in more and more Division I talent rather than the Division II they were in, and they have developed into the Sun Belt conferences like one of their most competing teams as a contender. You got Coastal Carolina, you've got them, you've got Louisiana. I mean, so they are a big contender year in and year out, all because I think this win 15 years ago. Because before that, they were the defending 2A or Division II champs that year, but they were able to maybe catapult themselves into where they were. I remember that game when I saw it was 15 years. Dalton, I
felt a little old.
Little's saying it mildly, but yeah, Sam Sentinel recalling the greatest upset ever witnessed by these 43-year-old eyes.
I love that moment. I love that game. And like I said, there is a small story behind it too. In talking with Mark Silverman from the Big Ten Network president.
Yeah.
So that game, it's actually, believe it or not, 15 years that the Big Ten Network's been around. That was the first game the Big Ten Network aired. That was the first game broadcast they had. And
makes sense that I saw it on Big Ten Network then.
Yeah, and Silverman had relayed the story before that they're all sitting there in the truck and like obviously it's an extension of the Big Ten Conference, right? So you're representing those schools. You want those schools to do the best, and so there's conversations in the back room as it's happening. And Silverman seeing Michigan drive down, and he goes, "Oh, thank gosh, let them kick the field goal, get the win. Let's get out of here. That's good. It's a good start." And one of the other producers that was back there with him actually was a Purdue grad. And he said,
good man, whoever he is.
He said, wouldn't it be better if he missed? And Silverman had said to him, what do you mean? It's Michigan. We're the Big Ten Network. We need them to kick it. We need them to win. We need that to take place, that to happen. And he goes, think how much attention this game would get if he misses. And then sure enough, blocked field goal. They almost return it all the way. And Silverman says almost immediately they get calls from all the different TV stations around.
We need rights to it.
Yeah, we want the highlights to the game. Can we play it? Sure, but put Big Ten Network. Sure, but put Big Ten Network. ESPN wants it. Everybody wants it. And he goes, and all of a sudden in game one, we got as much exposure as could possibly happen for our network. He goes, I think that was the liftoff to what the Big Ten Network became. Like, without all the attention it grabs from that iconic moment, who knows if especially as quickly as the Big Ten Network did, becomes such a huge success, because it's been a home run for the Big Ten Conference.
For sure.
And it probably inevitably would have been that anyway, but that launched it and sped tracked the whole process.
It gave it validity almost instantly, like literally gave validity to the Big Ten Network on game one. That's like hitting 2 grand slams in one inning in your first game, and they're your first 2 at bats. Like, yeah. You just made a record that will never be broken. You know, I mean, yeah, great. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. That I didn't know that was the very first game ever to be on Big Ten Network. That's
that launched what would be such a successful tenure for BTN.
Fantastic. I did not know that.
Real quick, with the Dalton Daily, I know we're getting a little heavy time-wise, so I'll speed this one up. This is a topic we thought about trying to talk about today, but we ended up getting sidetracked with a lot of games. We have football back. We don't know how to act. We have actual games now.
We got to actually plan things now.
I know. So we'll talk about this topic probably down the road, maybe even next week as well. But the college football playoff members met, all 11 of them, and there seems to be, or they're going to meet, is what the reports say. And the reports are also saying there's a lot of momentum that we're going to see the expansion again. Now, you might remember if you go back in the news cycle, it was a done deal. We were heading to 12, and that was it. And then all of a sudden, as conversations were unfolding, the whole thing unraveled and came undone. And commissioners of conferences got further away, where Greg Sankey from the SEC saying, hey, look, we don't want automatic qualifiers, or not nearly as much, because we could throw as many teams into the mix because we think we have the best conference. We think we could dominate the playoff if given that chance. And other conferences are saying, no, we need automatic qualifiers. And it became such a distanced and opposite magnetic type of discussion where they were so far apart. All of a sudden, it sounds like there's momentum to bring this back and maybe make this happen. A couple things to keep in mind. The current college football playoff contract ends in 2025. So the chances that we see something before then, unlikely. You would have to cut into the current contract a little bit, and people don't really want to have that happen. The other thing, as people start crunching the numbers, what they discovered is what Notre Dame and these conferences were kind of leaving on the table by not expanding the playoff. The potential revenue that sat out there was $450 million is what the quote is from ESPN.com. $450 million. Now, Sam, we've seen a lot of decisions recently be made by money, be driven at least by money, and money's had a part in it. If you think a lot of people are sitting out there saying $450 million, we don't really need it, I mean, think again. And I think that's why all of a sudden momentum is coming back that we might expand this playoff, because there's $450 million sitting there for the taking.
If you read any sort of articles on this, I only saw a couple mention it, but I took some interest in it. The only way they can change the current agreement. So if they wanted to do 12 teams next year, they have to have a unanimous vote from the commissioners and Jack Swarbrick.
Yep.
I don't think that would happen because honestly, right now, you're probably going to have conferences that say, no, Notre Dame needs to be in a conference. So they're under the conference automatic qualifying. And you have to have qualifications if you're going to expand. Automatic qualifiers. You have to. Think about this. If they go to 12 teams, there's only 5 power conferences at this point. Only maybe 4 after this. But my point being is you give the 5, that still leaves 7. So you take your, what is it, the best of 5 or the next 5 or whatever. So like the Cincinnati. So that's 6. That means there's 6 wild cards. If the SEC is really worried about, have the next 6 best teams, and then you've got 7 teams in the 12 that are your conference. Take what you can get, because the more I agree, more teams the better for the playoff. But you can't have just conference doesn't matter.
But there's not a ton of motivation, Sam. Don't mean to interrupt you. Just because the SEC sitting here saying, look, our field is currently 4 and we get half the field each year. Like we're putting 2 teams in and we're taking that money anyway. So if you guys want to play ball, we'll take our money and keep playing.
I get that, but here's what that's going to happen is they're going to play through 25, and then all of a sudden it's going to be back on the table, and then all of a sudden they're going to have to take what they get. Not control potentially what they get.
This will definitely be a good conversation to have in the next couple of weeks
for sure
as we move forward. But we're going to close out this week's episode of Big Ten Plus 4. Sam, I know you got to rat-a-tat-tat this, but you want to give a quick promo to let everybody know where to find us?
Hey, every week and in at 8:45 on Fridays, or maybe a little later on certain days, you can catch us on ASAP Network. We stream on their live TV. We stream on their website. We stream on YouTube with them. We stream on their Facebook. We do every sort of streaming with them. You can also find us social media at Big Ten Plus 4. Spell out the plus, Dalton. Don't put the plus sign for the Twitter. But then find us at oddpodsmedia.com, along with all the other family of Odd Media shows.
Perfect. All right. Well, that concludes another episode of Big Ten Plus 4. We'll be back next week to talk with you once again. But for Tony Hollinsworth, Sam Sprunger, I'm Dalton Shetler. Until next time, so long.
See ya.